Yo, Grand Rising, everybody, or good afternoon, or good night, wherever you at. Can you hear me? Maybe not. Yo, greetings and good vibes, everybody. Welcome to the Colonizers, Coffin, comrades, revolutionaries, and truth seekers. It's another episode. Of course, we like to give y'all blunt discussion, real news, cynical takes on pop culture and raw history, no chaser. I'm your host, John Tell. Let's go ahead and embark on a journey through some time, maybe truths that shape our world, from the untold stories of history to today's pressing issues. This is the space where knowledge meets revolution. I am joined by a guest today. Robert, what's going on, brother? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Grand risings to everybody. Keep your mind open and don't be afraid to challenge your beliefs.
Let's get it. So, I like to talk about a range of different topics, but and you seem to be right on par with me about a lot of shit. I was trying to pull up this first video and it's being freaking weird, so I'm gonna stop my screen and then restart and see if it works. Cause crap. Okay,
If you know which one it was on the list, I can pull it up too and try to share from my end.
I do. I just don't know why it's. All right, let me try this again. It won't even let me close out. Let's see if I could try a new window. All right, there we go. What the heck? It's as if my keyboard has just like froze up or something. Like, of course, right when I go to start a show, it wants to do this. Like opening credits, it did it. Like, come on. All right, so the first clip that I actually want to get into is about a black woman who schools people on, well, history. Yeah, it's still not working. If you could pull it up, that'd be awesome, brother. I don't know what the heck. And while we're at it, I'm going to put a commercial on. I'll be right back.
In Rwanda. I got 2 gallons of gas in the backseat. Finna rid you, please. I got that zoot suit boot juice. Yeah, kill you with a fingernail. There's air raid sirens in residential villages, wholesale slaughter, sons and daughters just because of their parentage, heritage, need a hermitage, pilgrimage, cleanse your sins, you bathe in the blood of innocence, it's a reticence to confess, there is no remembrance for those black.
Rise against the system, rise and fight for the dreams, the children, the hurt, hunger, lost souls from cancer's addictions, slavery and sins. Fight for the lost friends, fight for the love, the kind that comes from within. The truth won't be lost, I will fight for all are to win.
See, all I want is love, and you want it all the time. Could be our space and envy, I'd surely let you borrow mine. So should we take a gambit, spin 3 sevens in a line? Just share our space and envy, I'm sure we'd turn out fine.
All you want is love, and you want it all the time. Take my space and envy, don't forget that this one's mine.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
We were talking about memorizing stuff. I think I do better memorizing things with the aesthetic. like emotions of my
I think I found it, but it's for whatever reason my computer is giving me some grief. If you could see the screen, it's being weird. Oh man. Okay. Let me give you oh man. I mean, to the point where like my whole screen the wrong time, y'all. Okay.
I have it pulled up with the one with the LFR family. I can see if I can find the original.
That's not the one. There's one that's like 7 minutes long that I wanted to share, and so I'm gonna. I had to restart my whole laptop and pull that up. In the meantime, I'm gonna share some more stuff with y'all. So just be right back, y'all. Just momentarily. Just bear with
I have it up right now.
the short one.
Yep.
Bet you can go ahead and share it.
I don't know why it's not popping on your end.
Black Americans are voting Democrat at a rate of 90%.
Yes.
And despite that, 38% of black children are living in poverty.
Yes.
73% of black mothers are single mothers.
Yes.
40% of government assistance cases are black Americans.
Yes.
Do you think that the Democratic Party is serving black Americans well?
No, I don't. No, I don't. And you have to remember that it was the Republican Party that started. In the beginning, black people was for the Republicans. And what year? I don't remember when it got turned around. But right, yes.
Under Johnson.
Under Johnson.
When he signed
Right.
the welfare bill.
The New Deal.
Yes,
Yeah.
the New Deal. Yeah. Thank you.
I know my history.
Thank you. I don't
What is your name?
Alberta Frederick. Black people voted Republican. In fact, in fact, they was the ones who, when Lincoln was in office, black people was all in that office until Woodrow Wilson, the Democrat, took him out. The racist that he was, okay, he took him out, left one, and he had to share the party that he was in, share whatever office that he is in with a Democrat white person, okay? That was Woodrow Wilson who did that. And then the ones that was Democrats and they were black, they were the slave owners, because almost 4,000 blacks were slave owners, and they treated the blacks they treated their slaves worse than the white man. And at the same time, not only was the white man 10% of the white population that was slave owners, the one that was pushing up right behind them with the most slaves was the Cherokee Indians. Okay, that's my family. And then the third one was the Black Americans that was here. That was the free men, the free slaves, and the free men, the former slaves, and the free men. They was the one who ran the Republican Party. Okay, until Woodrow Wilson. And at the same time, like I said, the vast majority of your black slave owners was the Democrats.
That's right.
Yeah, what the Democrats?
A lot of people don't realize that the KKK was an arm of the Democratic.
They was and then at the same time they became even more popular under LBJ. Right. And then at the same time, because he was a Ku Klux Klan, and I remember because I was 13 years old when I went to that Civil Rights March. Okay, when Martin Luther King, who was a Republican.
That's right.
Who was a Republican. All right. The thing is that most of your entertainers, black entertainers and stuff like that, they all voted Republican. And the reason why a lot of the Democrats get into office, because when blacks was able to vote, okay, when they were able to vote, and they knew the Democrats knew that the black people held Republican tickets. They took their tickets out of their hands and put 2 Democrats in the box. Okay, that's how they got back into the office. The Democrats. Okay, that's how they really ran. Because they stuffed up the ballot box. Just like Al Gore, who was Ku Klux Klan, his father, when LBJ was signing the Civil Rights Bill, his father, the Grand Wizard, okay, was out there having a fit, doing their filibuster.
I think she could teach a course.
She can. Yeah.
Could I ask you a couple questions? Because if I may, I voted Democrat my whole life because I believed that they cared about gay people. I believe that they cared about black people, about brown people. I don't believe that anymore. I walked away from the Democratic Party. I created something called the Walkaway Campaign.
Okay. You started it?
I started it. Have you heard of it?
Yes. I heard.
Yes. And all of us. Yes.
So we made a movie called The Great Awakening, Breaking the Chains of the Democratic Party. It's made with the testimonials of 20 black Americans who have walked away. It's amazing. Why are 90% of black people still voting Democrat when the Democrats don't care?
Because the Democrats made it seem like under LBJ that they was becoming like the Republican. Never mind, the Republican never gave you welfare.
Right.
They never gave you welfare. And the black people said, oh, well, we needed welfare. No, you never did. Well, we was doing fine without it.
That's right.
I think so, too.
So much fine without it. But since when people know that, because even Booker T. Washington, he talked about why he noticed that how when he did the Tuskegee Institute thing, you had to make your own bed. Okay? So when the rich people wanted to send their kids there, he told them I guess they put in a note, they don't want the child to do this and this thing, that. He just looked at it, tossed it away, and told the kid, you want a bed? Here's the wood. Okay? Wow. Make your own bed. He said,
I love that.
And then at the same time, Frederick Douglasson always said, you want to help the black man? Don't. Because they know you give somebody something all the time, just like a child.
Right. They don't want to do
you get some right. Earn your keep.
And don't you remember that phrase, teach a man to fish?
Right, you teach him how to fish.
You don't give him a fish.
Okay? Because even Jesus said when they was up after he fed the 5,000 and then they come to far and they want to hear, he said, no, you came to me not because you wanted to hear what I have to say and this thing, because I fed you.
Right.
So they want to get fed again for free.
Don't you think it's time for a change?
I do. I really think it's time for a change.
Yeah. And this guy Cuomo, I remember his father. His father was nothing.
Right. Really? Yes, I do agree.
His father was nothing. And he's worse than his father. Talking about he doesn't want a conservative in this, not welcome here. Well, look, I'm not Borg. You ever watch Star Trek?
I don't.
Oh, well, I saw Star Trek. Right. I am not a Borg.
Right.
Okay? Now you go look at Star Trek and find out what a Borg is.
Yes.
No?
They conform.
I am not a Borg. I'm allowed to have my own mind. I'm allowed to be an individual. God made me an individual. He didn't make me a conglomerate. Okay? if I don't like your thinking, some people say, "Oh, all of us black people got to stick together."
No,
I said, "No,
I don't
I'm not
agree
going to
with
stick
that.
together with you because one, just like all black people don't look alike, I don't have to do what you're doing."
I don't see a D stamped on your forehead.
No.
Not
I
at
teach
all.
I teach my child the color is not a hindrance. You don't go out there and read a book and study like you're supposed to. Okay, nobody owes you anything.
I have to go
Okay.
into the Apollo, so
Can I give both of you ladies a hug?
please
Yeah.
do. I'll see you on
I
Wednesday,
adore you
right?
Thanks for talking. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you. For more great videos, download the Walkaway Social app at walkawaysocial.com.
Teach a man to fish. Wow. I mean, there was a lot of information in that video, but can you hear me? One thing that stuck out to me was about the parties and the switch. And some people know about it, some people don't. But that woman dropped a lot of knowledge on people. What's your thoughts on that, brother? You there?
Can you hear me?
Yep. You echoing.
Sorry, I lost you on the
you
audio on this one. I'm going to switch over to my computer for the voice. That way I can hear you as well.
Sounds good.
Give me 1 second.
Yep.
Sorry, I don't know why it cut out on the audio there.
Now you're good.
Sorry, what were you asking me?
So what do you think about this video? What comes to mind with what she's saying, like first off the bat? Because for me, it was about the switching of the parties. MLK was a Republican. I mean,
The
a lot of
biggest
people.
thing that stuck out to me was the fact that she said she was Cherokee.
Ah,
That is not typically what we think of a native looking like.
right.
And that was key to
However,
me.
You know, in the Black communities, we always, a lot of us, at least, all kind of, it's kind of like a joke or a thing. Like, yeah, my grandma was part Indian, my grandma was part Cherokee, my grandma was part whatever. But there's always truth in that, you know, and a lot of people don't really think about it. They don't actually think about it. You know, it's something that said like, yeah, I got Native American in me, I got Indian in me, I'm indigenous, but you really are. And in the next video that we're going to talk about, there's a lot of truth to that, in the sense of, you know, we talk about the one drop rule, and it still applies today. It's still socially implied that the one drop rule is law. For Black people, though, not for anybody else. And so shouldn't the one drop rule apply if you have indigenous in you as well? I mean, myself, I do acknowledge it and consider it just as much as I do the white blood in me. I consider myself to be of a mixed race when someone wants to actually talk about that kind of stuff. But if somebody just generally asks, I just say Black. However, I know that I'm a multitude of things, actually. I just don't really talk about it. You know what I mean? And I think that that's something that we are socially mandated to not speak about. And I think that that comes at the behest of the colonizers and the system and the structures of which we live within, unfortunately. But you know, with education and with a little conversation, I think that that kind of thing can go a long way to shattering the indoctrination under which we live, you know?
And the other part that stuck out to me was the fact that there was a multitude of different types of people that were owners of slaves. And this is something I didn't find out till recently, because I was always taught that it was white people. And then I started looking through history and I'm like, there's more to this. And then trying to figure out the different routes that we're taking and digging through that history, led me to other things, and some of them I've shared with you about who possibly visited the Americas first and stuff like that.
Right.
And it just becomes interesting because history is not necessarily what we've been told. It's his story.
That part. You know, I'm gonna. Wow, that's interesting. Something's up with my video again, so I'm just gonna rely on you to share the videos. But yes, his story and the story of the victors are the ones who have in recent history, recent written history that we are told has essentially been dominated by the colonizers, the imperialists, the Anglo-Saxon, the European way of telling a story. That's what we're brought up being told in our history books. However, does anyone ever think about the other narratives? All of the books that burned in Alexandria, all of the books that were in Timbuktu, all of the knowledge from Persia, from the Fertile Crescent, from times not too far long ago that actually told of ancient history and knowledge. And yeah, there were many other types of people, many other kinds of humans, many other kinds of races that once held domination over the world. We just happen to live under a Eurocentric way of life in this day and age. And I think that and this is what I want people to take away too, is each era, eon that we happen to be under, whoever's in domination of the world must be tackled at that point in time in history. And right now, it just so happens to be what it is. But I think that a lot of times we don't get the chance to ponder that. You know what I mean? What else from the video struck you?
Most of the Switch stuff I knew about, especially LBJ. LBJ has a really terrible quote that he read, and we even had to listen to it in our diversity class for the law enforcement. And that was, if you can teach a white man to look down upon a black man, he'll basically turn his pockets inside out, and you won't even notice you're picking his pockets or something like that. I don't have the exact quote, but it's something similar to that. And that's a lot of what they've done. And you can go back to the Scottish Rite. Albert Pike was a big part of that. They were very heavily involved with also B'nai B'rith, and they're the ones that started the KKK. Albert Pike's real interesting because he gets into theosophy and some of the bait and switch of religion in general that's happened since then, including like the Unitarian movement and stuff like that. But you need to go back and see who was writing books, who was the class that was writing the history in that, because not everybody was writing, and a lot of people did have an oral history as well, and not all that's been written down. But the books are out there, and you can go look. You can go look at the U.S. history through the Library of Congress and things like that.
You know, the issue that I take with modern society is how much it's interesting, the times we live in where so much information is amongst us, but we're also heavily inundated with such sensation that prevents us from being able to immerse ourselves in all the knowledge that is around us. You know, if it was 200 years ago, a person living 200 years ago, if they were living today, they would be astonished at the amount of information right in the palm of your hand. But people, it's out there.
Let me know which video you wanted to go into next, or if there's something you wanted to talk about before that.
Yeah, I do. But the next video I want to talk about is the who is Native American, who is Black, because it does play also on this video that we just played and that we're discussing now. Because, you know, again, I have indigenous blood in myself. It's not something that we generally have discussed. And also, you know, she talked about how free Black people, and it, free indigenous people also owned slaves. A lot of black people don't generally like to acknowledge it or talk about it. It's something to cringe away from. However, white people have to learn this history. We have to learn our history too. It's not such a great thing that it happened, but also think about why it happened. Maybe these free black and indigenous people took care of their enslaved better. Maybe they sought to buy them to protect them. Those are my initial thoughts. I can't personally say that, and I thinking of that now, I do want to do some research on that too.
Anthony Johnson's where to start. Okay, Anthony Johnson was born in Portugal, brought over here, and as an indentured servant, he ended up getting his freedom. He then ended up having other indentured servants. He was the first person in the U.S. to sue for lifetime indenture. So he was actually the one to make the case law for slavery in the U.S. rather than indentured servitude.
Wow. Like, why? Do you know why?
I have no clue. That I don't know. But it's just interesting because a lot of the indentured servants that came over from England too, a lot of them were criminals, but they also had the child nappers that were napping people off the street. And then I know some of the royalty, like they were all cousins in that. And then if they didn't like some of their cousins that were a little bit too inbred, they sent them over here as well. I'm not going to say how I know that, but
yeah. But so, like, what if it is some kind of conspiracy by the powers that be to further conquer and divide people and create that kind of caste system where whites were, seen as a little better, even if they were poor, even if they were Italian or Irish or whatever, than black people, and started that whole narrative.
It's funny.
I don't know.
Actually, who was considered white at the time? Turks were considered white. If you go back through the definitions, through Black's Law Dictionary and the codes that were on file at the time, Turks, Syrians were considered white, Moors were considered white.
Weren't there some indigenous people considered white too?
Correct. And so it's more of a class type thing than it was a race type thing.
Right.
And I didn't realize that until somebody was telling me about it. And I'm like, yeah, right. And it wasn't somebody that looked like me that was telling me. And so I was like, yeah, right. No, white's white, and
yeah, I think specifically for Middle Eastern people, it wasn't until like the 1920s that the classification changed from them being considered white.
And
I think it was
Aryan,
as recent as the 1920s. What's that?
A lot of them are Aryan, and that's Blavatsky went to that area.
Correct.
And that whole area all the way over to Tibet and Nepal, the north side of India, that's where they got the Aryan. The Aryan race is not blonde hair, blue eyes, folks.
Nope. You are correct. That's a whole nother topic we could talk about sometime too.
I have the video pulled up to share whenever you're ready for it, so I'll let you go.
You just hit me at the perfect time because I did want to bring that up. This next video talks about like we were talking about the one drop rule, but flips it and reverses it, but also talks about and kind of hints at what I've talked about before on previous episodes, and we'll definitely get into at some point too, is the concept of how we have explored and migrated all across the world long before Christopher Columbus or Europeans or even Vikings sailed and explored. And the thought that we actually ourselves as Black people were in some sense indigenous to the American continents long before Christopher Columbus and the American enslavement, transatlantic slave trade was even thought of. So isn't it possible that we are not African American or even Black, but simply American? And so I find this video special for those reasons. You can go ahead and bring it up.
Before I hit play, it already shared it for you, so you can bring it up whenever you're ready. But before I hit play on there, if you go through Library of Congress's depictions of natives, there's quite a few tribes that they describe with more African type features
Yes.
versus the like the more northern plains type tribes, like the southern tribes along the coast of Florida, Alabama,
Yep.
Louisiana, they
Yep.
had broader facial features.
Yep.
And when the description is very much like natives. They're not natives,
Talk
like
about it.
Africans.
So that is something I want to touch on really quick, is that if you go further south, there were different pockets where there were African people, clearly, allegedly, people of African descent that must have come there and settled. If you look at, like you said, specifically Louisiana culture, there are, and in the video here, they kind of talk about it. The fact that, and I'm jumping around a little bit, but bear with me and follow me here. The fact that the U.S. government is the one that authorizes you rights or status as an indigenous peoples or group in America is outrageous. How dare they? And who gets the right to say, oh, well, you're indigenous and you're not? And it usually seems to fall along the lines of color. And so there are indigenous groups in Louisiana that claim to be indigenous. However, they look completely black or African, and they are denied actual literal rights as indigenous people. And then you also have what are known as the California Indians, the native indigenous people to the lands of California. You look at the California seal and it is a black woman. Their people were black, bronze skin with blonde, honey blonde hair. And the queen was seen that way. Her features were as such, and she was seen as a beautiful woman with, I believe, like hazel eyes or some shit. But if y'all look it up, it's out there. The information is out there. And those are just two different groups. There's also information about white indigenous groups too. So it wasn't just Africans that sailed here and settled and mixed with indigenous people, possibly, or maybe they stayed to themselves. But either way, they definitely in some way changed their customs and styles to be more of what we think of as indigenous. Whether they were white people that settled, paler people that settled, probably, presumably, particularly in the North Americas or in the more temperate regions, and the darker probably reminded them of home, being in the warmer regions, to be darker featured, i.e. Louisiana, Mexico, and California. And I know I'm rambling here, but I know you know about the Olmec culture. And that is a topic that I do want to get into on a future episode, because I think that we can really dive deep and make more connections between South America, Central America, and Africa. So let's go ahead and get into this video and talk more about the connections between indigenous people of America and black people.
Powerful than actual physical genocide where you kill people, right? How you actually change the way that people think of themselves. These folks are 60 and 70% Indian, and you're telling them they're not because they're not from a federally recognized. That's even the argument that I've heard where people say you have an ancestor from 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever generations ago. That doesn't make you an Indian, right? But it makes you a black person.
Hi, my name is Danielle Romero, and thank you so much for joining me today for this really important conversation on my channel. I started looking into these topics and I started researching my family's hidden heritage in Louisiana and realizing that for a lot of groups in the United States, particularly African Americans and Native Americans, there's a lot of controversy about the way that these groups are classified. Today, we're going to jump right in to one of the most scintillating topics, which is to talk about the blood quantum for Native Americans, compare that to the one-drop rule for African Americans.
So you think you know wigs, but do you really? First up, we've got
Yatoi Hokisaku, Andrew Jolivet, Takapo Ishaki, Ishak. Andrew Jolivet. I'm a professor of ethnic studies at the University of California, San Diego, where I also chair the Department of Ethnic Studies and direct the Native American and Indigenous Studies program. Formerly, I was a professor and department chair of American Indian Studies at San Francisco State University. And I would like to acknowledge the Kumeyaay people of the San Diego territory, the unceded territory, as well as acknowledge the Ohlone people of the San Francisco Bay Area, where I was born and raised, and the Atakapo Ishak, the federally unrecognized, seeking state recognition tribe, which I'm a member of.
And they're from Louisiana.
In Louisiana, yeah.
Okay, so it's just interesting because I know you and I are both of like mixed Creole heritage.
So my father's Creole from Louisiana, and I would probably say what most folks might call white passing, which we can get into the whole idea of white passing or passing and what that means, because I have some issues with the term. My dad had a strong identification with being Black and Native, more so actually than with the white part, which is interesting because he was probably the lightest of all. He was born towhead, blonde hair, hazel eyes. I've always try to teach my students too to like push back on what people tell you. Like, I have students who are Mexican ancestry who will say, "Oh, well, people don't think I'm Mexican because I have blonde hair and blue eyes." I'm like, go to Guadalajara, there's plenty of blonde hair. People don't get to tell you who you are, and that's one of the problems that still exists, is that people say, well, if you don't fit a bubble. I remember people saying Beyonce's not Creole, you know, and I was like, why? Her booty's too big. These are actually Creole people, I think, who were maybe saying this years ago in New Orleans at a conference the Creole Heritage Center put on. Or other people who would tell me, oh, she's not Black because her hair is not the right texture for her. So it's interesting, the cultural cues, the codes.
Yes.
And my mother's African American with some little bit of European, little bit of Native ancestry. It made me think, how do people figure out what does it mean to actually be white or European, or what does that even mean? And so for me, people always tried to tell me who I was. Oh, you're mulatto. Oh, you're biracial, or you're half Mexican and half Black. They didn't know. And so I feel like very early on there was some confusion, but I think the one drop rule definitely impacted my dad. Uncle would always say he was biracial, and I was like, what happened to the Creole part? That's what always interested me, was that this cultural piece was missing. And so interestingly enough, I remember always my dad saying, well, yeah, we're also Native American, and had probably because of my dad, was not so much comfortable with my white side actually growing up. It was more, I was like, I'm Black and I'm Indian, and that was kind of it. And as I became an adult, well, wait a minute, we're much more than this. And so today I identify as Creole and multiracial or mixed race, and feel like, you know, we should be able to identify with all the different aspects of ourselves and not feel like folks should be controlling or telling other people who they get to be. Just like my aunts, if they wanted to identify as white, how is that passing if they're 60, 70% white or 80% white? If that's what they are, European descent, then that's their choice, right? I think it's beautiful for them to be able to also identify with their 5 or 8 or 10 or whatever it is percent Native, and their, 15 or whatever percent it is, African descent. So that's kind of what I would say, sort of growing up, my experiences. But it wasn't talked about. It was like a secret.
People want to comment about what they see. And I'll hear comments. But my hair is relaxed. I have my hair relaxed. I live in Nashville. I don't want to deal with the curls. And I know that like you look one way if you're this way or that way. And I think just how dangerous it is to make these assumptions based on what you see. But it's kind of awkward because one of these classifications is still codified into federal law, right? The blood quantum is nation to nation thing. And the other one obviously was overturned, and especially in Louisiana. 1983, one drop rules overturned.
Speaking of Guillory, right? Do you know the woman who sued, right, is our relative, Susie Guillory Phipps. So the 1982 case went to the Supreme Court, where she sued over her racial designation because she wanted to go travel, and her passport, and they said, no, your third great grandmother, who's Margarita Guillory, a very famous case. She's one of the first Black descent women who sued for her own freedom and then bought the freedom of her children. But she descends from this person, and so it sparked this huge case over the one drop rule, which is interesting because I don't know if you know, like in Louisiana, the one drop rule was so intense that even up until the 1960s, 1980s, even apparently here, they kept a list in vital statistics of particular surnames that they would return the records. And that's what happened to her essentially, is they returned her record. Now, the book I mentioned to you, Jack Forbes' book on Black and Native peoples, he was one of the first people, very smart, to catch this. It was a paper genocide, a bloodless genocide, right? One way to eradicate a people is to turn them into a completely different people, or to say they don't exist.
Right.
So one way that that's happened, right, is through racial mixing. And so mix them out, right? That was actually what the relocation program was all about. Federal relocation was really about moving Indians, Native people, into urban areas where they would mix and blend in with other people, so they would no longer, eventually they wouldn't exist, right? And so blood quantum is something that, yes, is codified into the law. I would say, though, that one drop is also, even as a social practice, still very much maintained. And so it's interesting how one is legal and one is now more social and sort of political and maybe cultural, you could say. But they both kind of function in terms of impact in the same way.
I know what you will say, but I do think for the sake of public-facing conversation, are these classifications creating a loss of identity, or are they preserving identity? And I think in particular, talking about Native Americans.
Whole topic of disenrollment. People, I have former students I remember her family got disenrolled, California tribe. Her grandmother, someone had to translate because she was one of the last speakers of their tribe's language, and they told them they're Mexican. I'm like, come on, are you serious? This is an elder, speaks the language, you're kicking them out? This is the internalization and the monetization of tribal identity. Well, there's a whole movement going on right now about pretendianism, right? I'm sure you've maybe heard a bit about it. I've kind of gotten myself stuck in the middle of it quite a bit for speaking out.
Pause that real quick.
Interesting because even though people will say, "Oh, well, no, we're not,"
because I think this is a good part to talk about. You see, and I think Chaz shared it one day. Some indigenous tribes, especially like in Minnesota and in like Massachusetts and Connecticut, that have that designation as indigenous group that have been able to own casinos and make their money. You know, as soon as you turn 18, you get a stipend, and these young indigenous people are rich, you know. But then you have some reservations where, particularly like American Southwest, where they're dirt poor and they don't have anything. You know, they're supposed to get a share to the Colorado River, and they don't get it. I think that he mentioned the word monetization, and I think that that is also key here, playing into the capitalist system and the structures of which we live within. That's what gets to dictate, in part, who is indigenous and who is not. I think that is something really to pay attention to. What's your thoughts there?
There's more to that in Minnesota, because the Sioux that did not fight in the war against the settlers that were here actually were allowed to stay in Minnesota, while the rest of the tribe was expelled to South Dakota mainly.
Wow.
And they were promised land. And in fact, they were promised land that, when the tribe came back, was given to the tribe that had disowned them, and they got nothing. So their 80 acres disappeared. And one of the families that I know,
they were treated like black people.
Their land actually sits where Mystic Lake is, and they've been suing over it. And the government said, well, we gave away your land. So sorry. Too bad.
Exactly what they promised to my people, 40 acres and a mule, and gave it back to the slave owners, or white people or other people just gave it up instead of what we were promised. I find that interesting.
The whole war up here was a sham, though. It was about the gold rush happening, wanting to set up rail routes and trading routes along there, and about not wanting to give them gold or their money that was promised to them and the people that were in charge of the forts literally told them they weren't going to give them food to go eat grass and poo, and that's when they started raiding for food.
Holy shit.
Do you want me
I
to
don't
go
know
back to that video?
No, fuck that video for right now. I mean, it's a great video, and I am going to.
I do have one other thing to share, though, that ties right into what he said.
Bet. Because I'm going to go ahead and put some of the links in the chat for people to check out while you go ahead and share that.
Okay. So this is about the founding of the NAACP. Okay. W.E.B. Du Bois invited Franz Boas to the final lecture at the conference where the NAACP was officially incorporated. Boas presented the real race problem, in which he argued that the real problem was the difference in type. To solve it, the Negro needed to amalgamate, encouraging the gradual process of lightening up this large body of people by the influx of white blood. And Franz Boas was part of the communists that were part of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Okay. That's where the one drop thing comes from. That's what they wanted to do. It's right there in their own words. And it's part of the NAACP's founding.
You know, I liken that to Brazil and their way. I think they had a name for it. I can't remember the Spanish name, but it was called like the lightning. And their interpretation was to literally just have everyone breed together and lighten the skin gradually over generations. I think our interpretation was a little different, but still it's the same thing.
If you go to any Hispanic culture, especially in Central or South America, it's the same. The more Castellano or light skin color you are, the better off you are. The darker you are, you're treated like dogs almost. Yeah,
exactly. And you know what? With that, I forgot that I had to click on the thing. With that being said, though, I think for Black people that judge other Africans, like, yeah, the whole reparations thing, I get that because they didn't go through that here, but their ancestors went through it where they came from. So they're entitled to something. It just may not be here. So we should not discriminate amongst other Black people that went through the same thing that we went through here in America. I just want to say that.
And I have a bit of a weird view on reparations. Part of that is if we've like purposely kept a certain group down for so long, we should probably help them succeed, especially given that white people aren't having enough babies because they're going to be leading the country, and we should probably set them up to not make the same mistakes that we're making. For giving all this money to overseas and all these other places, we can probably do better together, you know. But
I personally think it should be some kind of investment fund that's set up. And you know, when a kid turns 18, they get certain kind of stipend. If they do some kind of, I'm not saying it has to be college, because I'm sure you know how I feel about higher education, but trade or some kind of incentive to be able to still have that money. And I don't even know how I necessarily feel about that, because I don't necessarily want the government tracking just a particular group of people's income and earnings in a certain way. But I feel like it's a conversation that we really do need to get into.
Well, on the other side of that is, if you look at the rural areas in the U.S. are dying. And when I say that, not ha-ha dying, like abandoned buildings dying.
Well,
and
I mean,
so they're trying to push the urbanization. If Black people want to farm, why not teach them to be farmers?
You know, speaking of, did you hear about a couple years ago, there was a bill for Black farmers because they were getting shut out, and they were getting the contrast between Black farmers getting the shitty end of the stick versus white farmers getting the shitty end of the stick, because white farmers get the shitty end of the stick too. Let's look at private entities, corporate interests, and all that, building industrial farms. Um, all farmers are losing right now, big, and they're like one of the number one factors in male suicide rates, especially amongst white men, are farmers. Black farmers, there was a bill, an incentive for them to get a certain level of things so that they can get back on their feet and continue to produce. And white people, I won't say along party lines particularly, but a bunch of white people said that that was racist and discriminatory, so it got halted. But you brought up a really good point there.
Oh, sorry. They don't realize that the farming has been subsidized since the end of World War II at a minimum, probably going back to the Great Depression. And the problem that you had was the overproduction that led up to the Dust Bowl, and then especially after the Dust Bowl. We can do better, and we don't have to have the government subsidizing everything. We could have cheaper food, more healthy food, if we did a direct farmer to consumer. But we don't. We don't have local farmers that produce locally and local stores to go shop at. We have big box stores, and they super process everything in between. So there's a better way to do it.
Think about how many black and small farmers that do operate that way are the number one ones getting shut out or having to shut their doors, their barns, because of corporate takeovers. And not so
government regulation as well. They're regulating them out. Like for the beef, they're trying to get it to where you can't custom process and sell directly to the customer. Same thing with the raw dairy, and you can go down the list on that.
Now that's a huge problem right there. That is a huge problem. What is this link you have up on the screen?
Oh, we already went over that. That was about the founding of the NAACP, W.E.B. Du Bois, and Franz Boas.
So I do want to go back to that a little bit and backtrack, because there's an overall theme that we have touched on this whole episode concerning lightning, concerning mixing, and how we are defined by one particular set of people based off of how they view us, but they also, unfortunately or fortunately, created us, domesticated us, and then on top of it tell us who we are. And I think it's important for one to look at yourself and ask who you are. I've watched lots of documentaries from Brazil where people of color identify how they see themselves, not what society. There's a huge cultural shift happening where more and more people that we would deem of African descent that didn't grow up identifying with that term or ethnicity or identity, and now they're looking at themselves in the mirror and saying, oh my God, I'm African. Oh my God, I'm black. You know what? I'm going to walk outside and tell people I'm black. And so you even get people that we would deem biracial or mixed race or indigenous identifying as black instead of the 18 other classifications that they have under race in that country. And I find that inspiring, actually, because we should be considering the same kind of things here in America. What am I?
Franz Boas is actually more interesting because he's one of the fathers of archaeology. Or not archaeology, sorry, anthropology, not archaeology.
Yeah.
Which is the study of people groups.
Yeah.
And so he gets interesting, and especially with some of his influences with what you just said, because his influences were Darwin, who comes from the same type of ilk as him. And then from Darwin, you also have Francis Galton. And so you have literally the scientific racism brothers, basically. They were cousins, actually. Darwin and Galton were cousins. Shortly thereafter, you have Franz Boas. Okay. And so if you want to talk about the anthropology that we're taught in the schools in that, if these are the people teaching you, we should probably rethink what we're learning about this history.
Right. Oh my fucking God. You know, I do want to go deeper into, and it's something that is a huge passion of mine, anthropology in general, just regions and people, cultures, and the differences between them, what makes them them, and how special different cultures are, how colonizers just drew lines on pieces of paper and divided up whole groups of people and said, well, this is this and this is that. What makes that, and what makes this, and what makes that. By uniting the disciplines of archaeology, the study of material culture and history, and physical anthropology, the study of variation in human anatomy, with ethnology, the study of cultural variation of customs and descriptive linguistics, the study of unwritten indigenous languages, Boas created the four field subdivision of anthropology, which became prominent in American anthropology in the 20th century. So I'm wondering how much of our thinking and culture and perspective concerning people and groups of people, specifically in America, derives particularly from this man and those people like Darwin and Darwinism, because we tend to just focus on that, but we really don't focus on the anthropology as a whole side of it.
Now, he did do something positive, which is at the top there, the cultural relativism, which basically just says that no culture is above another. There is a positive to it. So they weren't necessarily all bad,
right?
But then you look at his other stuff, and it's like, no, we shouldn't be like forcing people to ruin who they are and their history just to quote unquote whiten them up by injecting white blood.
Like, how I try to look at it is, people think about what society was like in their time, and I'm not saying that these people had good or bad intentions. I'm just saying that given the information that they knew at that period in time and how they thought about beings at that time, I feel like their intentions were on more of the good side of things, trying to just classify and make sense of humans in the world.
Darwin and Galton, and specifically, I would disagree on that, just for the fact of the time frame, because it was at the beginning of when the slave trade was reaching England. The Portuguese started the slave trade, and then Amsterdam, and then it went to England. Okay, and they were trying to justify enslaving people, which is why Darwin and Galton did some of this stuff and said some of the stuff that they did, is they were trying to justify it.
So I mean, yeah, so it's the period of time. I'm not saying it was good or bad, but understanding what they knew, felt about society, I get it, but it doesn't excuse it. This is fucking interesting. They were cousins.
Galton and Darwin were cousins. Franz Boas came later.
Got you.
And you have to remember that the doctrine of discovery was actually put out by the Catholic Church. Okay. And they literally said that the land isn't being farmed and the people aren't Christian.
Right.
You can take over. It's legal. And they had done similar things previously. They had told all the Christians, after they did the money penance for sins, they said, oh, hey, if you go kill people in the Crusades, I'll forgive your sins. But the popes are real interesting, too, because a lot of them bought their positions. And then going back to the Medici family, who had I think 3 or 4 popes that came out of there. It just gets real interesting because the continuation of the Roman Empire was the church. And that whole thing gets interesting, especially with the black nobility in Europe as well. And some of the other
nobility. We're going to get into that. Yeah. That is something that I think the next time that I have you on, that we can start at, actually, we would have to backtrack from that, but that's a portion that I do want to talk about. And there's two other videos that I wanted to share, but I'm not going to share them because we're running out of time. But actually, I already saved. I have the information, I have the links, and then the ones I want to save, I already have in my doc. And we can go over that prior to the next chat. But I want to listen to you some more and your thoughts, just connecting all the things we shared and talked about today, and like what your message would be for viewers and listeners about like what their takeaway should be, what information you think they could research and look up.
History has a lot of nuances, so anytime that we think, especially if we're being told a really egregious story about only one side, stop, think, and then go research and look it up. And especially the things you're told not to look up.
Right.
That's probably what you want to be looking up. The trail that I went down multiple different ways was basically I was being told stuff about slavery, and it was by people that didn't look like me, and I was like, wow, that's interesting. Let me go see. Or trying to disprove some people on some stuff, and then I ended up proving them right. And so just keep your mind open, because there's more to history, and if we listen from each other and learn from each other, we learn that our differences aren't as great as we think. And if we think that we are created to be special and above others, that allows us to oppress others. And throughout history, we've seen that. And we're seeing it become so divided from the left to the right, from the, up to the down, to the, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
We keep on labeling ourselves and dividing ourselves rather than coming together and saying, what do we want the future to look like? We're allowing people to divide us and rule us. And are they really the people that we want ruling us? Especially if they're in these secret societies like JFK warned about at his press corps speech at the Waldorf Astoria. If you want to look it up, JFK speech, Waldorf Astoria, he talks about it. Eisenhower warned about it. And when he was leaving office, the military-industrial complex and that.
Right.
So just realizing that if there's a small group of people in power, and it's not just all of one group, okay?
Right.
If there's bad people from a group, there's probably good people from that group too.
Yep.
And so don't place blame. And usually the ones that take advantage of us the most actually look like us.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's from my experience. That's what I've seen.
Yeah.
And it just gets interesting. But we can all come together and also realize that the technology that they're pushing on us, this rush of our everyday life, it doesn't need to be like this. The world can be different. Mm-hmm. So where do we want to end up? How do we want to live? I want peace and harmony.
Wow. Big words. So many takeaways from that, and those are going to be put into reels. Trust me. Robert, it's always a pleasure, but thank you so much for coming on the show. Your first time, and there will be many, many more. I think the next time I have you on, we'll definitely be speaking more about people of color, but also their dealings in more of a time that is, I find, more fascinating because it throws people off, and it's not something that you necessarily see in school history books, so a lot of people question it. But that is the part of the point of this show, is to question things. So as you say as well, Robert, I want people to please go do your research, and everything that we talked about on this show, make sure that you challenge the narratives that you're fed. It's important to think for yourself, question everything, and do your due diligence. We have tons of information out there to check up on. So I'm going to wrap this show up. Make sure you follow us, hit the like button, share the stream, Follow us on all our platforms: Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, X, Twitch. You already know Spotify. Just search the Leon Block. That wraps it up for tonight, y'all. Appreciate y'all. Be well. Robert, it's a pleasure.
You take care and bless up. Blessings to everybody.